Clara's fingers had gone white, gripping her baby brother's blanket. She didn't cry anymore. She'd already used up every tear she had watching the wagon train disappear over the ridge. 9 years old. One twisted leg dragging useless through the Texas dirt. And Samuel, barely 3 months old, was so quiet now, she kept pressing her ear to his chest just to make sure he was still breathing. When the stranger's horse slowed on the trail above her, Clara looked up and said the only thing she had left to say, "Please don't leave us." If this story already has your heart, please subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, and follow along until the very end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all began. Ethan Walker had been riding the same stretch of wagon trail for 11 years, and in all that time, he had never once stopped for anything he didn't have to stop for. That was the rule he lived by now. Keep moving. Don't look too long at anything that might make you feel something. Because feeling something had a way of costing a man everything, and Ethan Walker had nothing left to spend. His horse, a big gray gelding named Dust, slowed without being asked. Ethan felt the change in the animal's gait, a hesitation, a lean forward in the ears, and he almost urged the horse on. Almost. Then he heard it. It wasn't crying exactly. It was something thinner than crying, something that had come out the other side of crying and kept going. He pulled Dust to a stop. Down off the left side of the trail, pressed against the root of a broken mesquite tree, a child was sitting in the dirt. She was small, far too small for 9 years old, though he wouldn't know her age until she told him. Her dress was the color of ash and torn at both shoulders, and one of her legs lay at an angle that made something twist painfully in Ethan's chest before he'd even had time to think about it. She was holding something wrapped in a piece of horse blanket against her chest, and the thing she was holding was making the sound he'd heard from the trail. Ethan dismounted without deciding to. He walked down the shallow embankment, keeping his hands visible, moving slow, the way you moved around a spooked animal. The girl watched him come. She didn't run. Couldn't run. He understood that now, and she didn't scream. She just watched him with eyes that were far too old for the face they lived in. Dark eyes, still and steady as creek water in drought. He crouched down a few feet away and held himself there. "Hey," he said. That was all he had. "Hey," the girl said back. He looked at the bundle she was holding. A baby. An infant so young it barely had the mass to hold its own shape, its face scrunched and red from effort, its cry going ragged and thin like a lantern running out of oil. "That yours?" Ethan asked. "My brother," the girl said. "His name's Samuel. He's hungry. I ain't got nothing to feed him." Ethan looked back up the trail. The wagon ruts were fresh hours old at most. He looked back at the girl. "Where's your people?" Something moved across her face. Not pain exactly, something colder than pain. The look of a person who has already made their accounting of a situation and come out the other side of it. "Gone," she said. "Gone? How?" She shifted Samuel against her chest with a practiced ease that broke something quiet inside Ethan's ribcage. The baby's cry died down to a wet, exhausted murmur. "My stepfather said me and Samuel was slowing everybody down," she said. "Said a cripple girl and a sick baby wasn't worth the water they drank. So he stopped the wagon and told me to get out." She paused. "I got out." "And your mother?" she cried. The girl's voice didn't waver. "She cried real hard, but she didn't get out with us." Ethan sat with that for a moment. He didn't say anything because there wasn't anything decent to say. He looked at the baby, and then at the girl's leg, and then at the trail stretching empty and pale in both directions. "How long you been sitting here?" "Since before noon." She tilted her chin at the sky. "Reckon it's past 4 now." He looked at Samuel again. The baby's lips were dry and cracked. His color was wrong, too white at the edges, too dark under the eyes. "He needs water," Ethan said. "And milk if we can find it." "I know that." Her voice sharpened for just a moment. Then she pulled it back. "Sir." Ethan reached behind him and unhooked his canteen. He held it out toward her. She took it immediately. No hesitation, no pride getting in the way. Unstopped it, and dripped water carefully onto her own finger, then pressed it to Samuel's lips. The baby's mouth moved. She did it again, patient and slow and completely certain in what she was doing. Ethan watched her and didn't speak. After a minute, she handed the canteen back. "Thank you," she said. "I'm Clara. Clara May Bennett." "Ethan Walker." She studied him with those old, quiet eyes. "You gonna leave us too, Mr. Walker?" And there it was. The question sitting in the dirt between them, like a stone he'd have to step over or step around for the rest of his life. He looked at this 9-year-old girl, with her ruined leg, and her dying baby brother, and her voice that was perfectly level when it had every right not to be, and he felt something happen inside his chest that he hadn't felt in 3 years. Not love, not yet. Something that came before love. Something that felt like recognition. "No," he said. "I ain't leaving you." Clara nodded once, like she was recording a fact. "All right then," she said. He got his arms under her without making a production of it, lifting her carefully, with Samuel still held against her chest, and carried them both up to where Dust stood waiting. Getting Clara into the saddle required some working out her leg, meant she couldn't sit the normal way, but she didn't complain, and she didn't apologize, just adjusted herself until she found the position that worked and held Samuel firm, and said, "I'm good," in a voice that left no room for argument. Ethan took the baby from her long enough to mount behind her, then settled Samuel into the crook of his left arm. The infant was lighter than he expected, disturbingly light. He could feel the small ribs working. "He's gonna be all right," Clara said. She wasn't asking. "We'll see to it," Ethan told her. He turned Dust toward home and didn't look back at the trail. The ranch sat 4 miles outside Red Hollow, set back from the road behind a line of old cottonwoods that had gone mostly bare in the fall cold. It wasn't much to look at. Ethan knew that better than anyone. The cabin had a window on the north side that leaked wind when the weather turned, and the barn roof had needed patching for 2 years, and the kitchen had exactly the kind of emptiness that comes not from being bare, but from once having been full. He'd stopped seeing it a long time ago. Just a place to sleep. When he helped Clara down from the saddle in the yard, she stood, or rather, held herself upright with one hand gripping the stirrup and looked at the cabin with an expression of such concentrated attention that Ethan found himself looking at it too, trying to see it the way a stranger would. "It's real solid," Clara said. "It leaks," Ethan told her. "I've slept in worse." She said it easily, like weather. Then she looked at him. "You got a wife?" "Had one." She heard the had and didn't push at it. "Children?" "A boy, James. He was 3. "Where are they?" "Buried," he said. "Fever. 3 winters back." Clara looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Walker." And she said it the way adults say it, when they mean it, no flinching, no rushing past it to make herself comfortable. "Come inside," he said. The first hour was the hardest. Samuel needed milk, and Ethan didn't keep a milk cow, but one of his neighbors, a widow woman named Mrs. Pratt, who ran 2 goats on 20 acres, was close enough that he rode out fast, and came back with a jar of warm goat's milk, and strict instructions from Mrs. Pratt that he had no business raising babies alone, and she'd be by in the morning to see what the situation was. Clara fed Samuel with the cloth dipped in milk, squeezing drops, slow and careful, into the baby's mouth, talking to him the entire time, in a voice so low and steady it was almost a hum. Samuel's cry thinned and then stopped. He drank. His color began to even out. Ethan built up the fire and didn't say anything, but he watched from across the room and felt something happening in the house that hadn't happened in 3 years. He couldn't name it yet. He was afraid to try. Clara looked up and caught him watching. "He likes it when you talk," she said. "Samuel. Even when he was first born, if you talked, he'd go quiet. Like he was listening." She paused. "Our mother used to sing to him." "What happened to your mother?" Ethan asked. "Before the wagon train, I mean." Clara was quiet for a moment, working the cloth, watching Samuel. "She married Vernon Bennett 2 years after our daddy died," she said. "Vernon was fine at first, or fine enough. But he wanted a son, and when Samuel came, something changed. He got impatient, with everything that wasn't moving fast enough or earning enough." She touched Samuel's cheek with one finger. "With me. How'd your leg come to be the way it is?" "Born that way." She said it flatly. "The doctor told my mama it was a bad position in the womb. Said there weren't nothing to do about it. Vernon said that was the worst luck he'd ever heard of, and that God had it out for him personal." She glanced up. "He said a lot of things." "How bad does it pain you?" She blinked, like the question surprised her. "Some days worse than others. Today's been today. I didn't pay it much mind. Had other things to mind." Ethan pulled a chair close to the fire and sat down. "I need to look at that leg, make sure nothing's infected from the crawling." "It'll be fine." "Miss Clara." She looked at him. "I'm going to look at that leg," he said, quiet and even. She stared at him for another second. Then she said, "Yes, sir." And he heard in those 2 words something that made his jaw tighten, the automatic compliance of a child who had learned that disagreeing cost more than it was worth. The leg was infected. Not badly, not yet, but the skin along the ankle and knee was hot and abraded raw from dragging through dirt and rock for hours. He cleaned it with what he had, and bound it with strips of clean linen, and didn't let his face show what he was thinking. And Clara sat still through all of it, and held Samuel, and talked to the baby so softly, Ethan couldn't make out the words, just the rhythm of them. When he was done, she said, "Thank you," in that same steady voice. "You should sleep," he said. "I don't sleep much." "Tonight you will." He gave her the bed, the only real bed, his bed, the one he hadn't changed the quilt on in 3 years, because the quilt had been Sarah's, and he slept in the chair by the fire with Samuel in his arms, because the baby needed warmth and someone to feel breathing against them. He'd read that somewhere, or maybe Sarah had told him, that babies needed to feel another heartbeat. He didn't sleep for the long time. He sat in the firelight with this infant he'd never met, and listened to the wind working at the north window, and thought about nothing very carefully. Sometime past midnight, Clara's voice came from the bed. "Mr. Walker?" "Still here," he said. A pause. "Why'd you stop on the trail? You could have kept riding." Ethan looked at the fire. "Dust stopped," he said. "The horse, he heard something." "But you came down anyway." "Yes." Another pause. "Most people don't." He didn't have an answer for that because it was true, and they both knew it was true, and covering the truth with words wouldn't help either of them. "Get some sleep, Clara," he said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Mr. Walker, I want you to know I ain't going to be a burden. I can cook. I can mend. I'm real good with numbers, the school teacher back in Abilene told me so. And I won't ask for nothing that ain't necessary. I know how to. I know how to take up small space." Something moved through Ethan's chest like a blade drawn flat, not cutting, but pressing. He turned in the chair to look at her. She was lying on her side facing him, Samuel tucked against her, watching him with those dark, still eyes. "Clara," he said. "Sir?" "You stop talking like that." She blinked. "Like what?" "Like you got to earn the right to exist somewhere." His voice came out rougher than he meant. He steadied it. "You don't owe me a list of your uses. You're a child. You don't owe anybody that." She stared at him. "Now go to sleep," he said. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she turned her face toward the wall, and he heard her breathing slow, and eventually, long after he thought she might not, she slept. Ethan sat with Samuel and watched the fire burn down and tried not to think about the fact that for the first time in 3 years, his house didn't feel like a grave. Morning came hard and gray, the way West Texas mornings did in late fall, with a cold that got into the boards of the cabin and made everything creak and shift. Ethan was already at the stove when Clara woke up, and Samuel fed twice more through the night. With the last of the goat's milk was sleeping in a crate Ethan had lined with the cleanest blanket he owned. Clara appeared in the doorway of the bedroom, upright on her good leg, with one hand on the doorframe, taking the room in the way she'd taken in the ranch the night before, careful and complete recording it. "Coffee," Ethan said. "Yes, please." He poured a cup and set it on the table, and she made her way across the room with a movement that was almost graceful in its efficiency, not the gait she would have had with two good legs, but completely her own, worked out over 9 years of necessity. She sat down and wrapped both hands around the cup. "You were up all night," she said. "Some of it." "You don't have to do that. I can hear Samuel in the night." "I know you can." He set a plate of biscuits on the table. "Eat." She ate. 3 biscuits, one after another, without apology. Ethan felt something ease in him at the sight of it, the pure animal relief of watching someone who had been hungry eat without shame. When she was done, she looked at him across the table. "What happens now?" "Today I ride into Red Hollow and talk to Doc Harper about Samuel, see if there's something we ought to be doing that we ain't." He poured himself more coffee. "Then I start asking around about your stepfather." Her face changed, just slightly a tightening around the eyes. "About Vernon." "About what legal standing he's got over you and Samuel," Ethan said. "Whether he can come back for you." "He won't come back," Clara said. "He doesn't want us." "Wanting and owning are different things, Clara." She went quiet. Her hands tightened around the cup. "What if he has papers?" she said. Her voice was lower now. "What if he signed something? Vernon was always signing papers. He liked papers. He said papers made things real." "Then we deal with what the papers say." Ethan held her gaze. "But nobody is taking you anywhere without going through me first. You understand that?" She looked at him for a long time, like she was measuring the distance between what a person says and what a person does. Like she'd measured that distance before and found it wanting. "You don't know us," she said finally. "You don't know me and Samuel. We could be trouble. We probably are trouble." "Probably," Ethan agreed. "Most people wouldn't." "Clara." She stopped. "I know what I said last night," he told her quietly. "And I know what I'm saying now. That ain't changed, and it ain't going to change. So you can keep waiting for me to take it back, or you can just let it be true." She looked down at her coffee cup. One of her fingers traced the rim slowly. When she looked back up, something in her face had shifted, not opened exactly, but moved. Like a door that had been stuck for a long time, given its first real push. "All right," she said. "Mr. Walker? All right." From the crate in the corner, Samuel made a sound, not the thin, desperate cry of last night, but something rounder and more present, a baby learning to claim space. Clara was on her feet before Ethan could move. Crossing the room with her tilting, efficient gait, reaching into the crate and lifting her brother with both hands, settling him against her shoulder with the competence of someone who'd been doing it since the day he was born. She turned back to Ethan with Samuel against her cheek. "He's warm," she said. "He was cold last night." "He's better," Ethan said. Clara pressed her lips to the top of Samuel's head. The baby curled a fist against her collar and made the sound again, softer this time, almost contented. Something that in a warmer world you might call a sound of being home. Ethan Walker looked at this girl with her ruined leg and her baby brother and her careful, watchful eyes, and he thought of the 11 years he'd spent on that trail without stopping. Thought of all the things he'd ridden past because stopping cost something, and he'd told himself he had nothing left. He hadn't known. He just hadn't known. "I'm going to build you something for that leg," he said abruptly. "A proper support. Something you can use to move easier." Clara looked at him. "That's..." She stopped. Started again. "You don't have to do that." "I know I don't." She held his gaze. Samuel's fist uncurled against her collar fingers, spreading like a small star. Outside, the wind moved through the cottonwoods with a sound like water, and somewhere in the barn, dust shifted his weight and stamped once against the cold ground. "Okay," Clara said quietly. And then so softly, he almost missed it. "Thank you." It was the first time she'd said it without immediately following it with what she could offer in return. The first time she'd let the thanks just sit there unhedged between them. Ethan turned back to the stove. "Eat another biscuit," he said. "Long day ahead." And for the first time in 3 years, when he said the words "long day ahead," they didn't feel like a sentence. They felt like something worth getting through. Doc Harper took one look at Samuel and didn't say anything for a long moment, which was how Ethan knew it was serious. The old doctor turned the baby over in his hands, careful, methodical, the way a man handles something fragile that he refuses to let break, and pressed 2 fingers below Samuel's ribs and listened and pressed again. Samuel made a sound of protest. His legs kicked. "That's a good sign," Clara said from the chair in the corner. She hadn't let go of the edge of the examination table the entire time. "When he kicks." "It is," Doc Harper said. He looked at her. "How long was he without milk?" "Since the morning of the day before yesterday, maybe longer. Vernon cut the wagon rations 2 days before he—" She stopped, adjusted. "Before we stopped traveling." Doc Harper looked at Ethan over the baby's head. Ethan said nothing. He'd already told the doctor what he needed to know on the ride in. "He's dehydrated and underweight," Doc Harper said. "But his heart's sound and his lungs are clear. The goat milk was the right call." He wrapped Samuel back in his blanket and held him toward Clara with both hands. "He needs feeding every 2 hours. Goat milk is fine for now. In a few weeks we'll see about something more substantial." Clara took Samuel with the automatic certainty she always had, settling him against her shoulder before she even had him fully in her arms. "Will he be all right?" "He'll be fine," Doc Harper said, and then quieter in the voice he used when he meant it most. "He'll be just fine, young lady." Clara exhaled through her nose. Not a sigh. Something more controlled than that, like a valve releasing pressure that had been building since the day on the trail. Doc Harper turned to Ethan and lowered his voice. "The girl's leg needs proper attention. That infection? I cleaned it last night." "I know you did. I'm saying she needs more than cleaning. There's a man in San Antonio, physician studied in Boston, who's done work with congenital limb conditions. Bracing. Corrective supports." He paused. "I'm not saying it fixes what was done wrong in the womb, but he's helped children walk who didn't think they'd ever walk right." Ethan looked at Clara. She was talking to Samuel, not listening or pretending not to listen, which he was beginning to understand was a thing she did. Listening while looking away. "Write down his name," Ethan said. Doc Harper wrote it down. Then he set his pen on the desk and folded his hands and looked at Ethan the way he had since Ethan was 17 years old, and the doctor was the only man in Red Hollow who'd treated the ranch foreman's boy like his questions deserved real answers. "Ethan," he said, "you need to talk to Judge Alcott." "I know. Today. Not next week. Today." He leaned forward. "If that stepfather signed anything over to anybody, you are sitting on a problem that won't stay quiet." "I said I know Herschel." "I'm saying it again because you've got that look on your face." "What look?" "The look you get when you've already decided something and you're waiting for the world to catch up." Doc Harper stood. "Alcott owes me a favor. I'll send word ahead. Go see him this afternoon." Judge Alcott's office smelled like tobacco and old paper, and the particular kind of tension that lives in rooms where decisions get made about people's lives. The judge himself was a lean, deliberate man who had been dispensing law in West Texas for 23 years, and he had the eyes of someone who had heard every story twice. He heard Ethan's once. Then he opened the bottom drawer of his desk and pulled out a ledger, ran his finger down a column of entries, and went very still. Ethan watched his face. "What is it?" Alcott looked up. "When did you say you found them?" "Day before yesterday, late afternoon." "And the stepfather's name?" "Vernon Bennett, traveling west with a wagon train out of Abilene." Alcott closed the ledger. He set his hands flat on the desk. "A man named Silas Boone filed a contract claim in this office 8 days ago," he said, "for 2 minors under the guardianship of a Vernon Bennett, a girl and an infant boy." The room got very quiet. "A contract claim," Ethan repeated. "A labor indenture. Legal under territorial law for abandoned or orphaned minors. Alcott's voice was careful and precise, the way a man speaks when he knows the words are going to land like stones. Boone filed papers claiming he'd purchased the guardianship rights from Bennett for the purpose of, and I'm quoting the document here, productive employment in service of mining operations in New Mexico territory. Ethan didn't move. He bought them. The paperwork says so. The baby is 3 months old. The paperwork doesn't specify ages, only names. Alcott looked at him steadily. I want you to understand that I am not telling you this is right. I am telling you this is what the papers say. Those are two different things. Where is Boone now? He arrived in Red Hollow yesterday. Alcott picked up his pen, set it down again. He's been asking around about a missing pair of children. He'll have heard you brought them in by now. A town like this, news moves fast. How long do I have? Legally. Alcott spread his hands. If the documents hold, he can compel return of the children within 72 hours of locating them. Ethan, can the documents be challenged? On what grounds? Bennett abandoned them on a public road, Ethan said. Left them to die. The girls infected the baby, nearly starved. That's not a man who had legal guardianship. That's a man who committed abandonment. Alcott was quiet for a moment. That argument has merit. But it takes time to make in front of the right people, and Boone has money, and he has lawyers, and he has documents that are on their face properly filed. He paused. I'll do what I can, but you need to be careful. Boone didn't get rich being patient. Ethan stood. Neither did I. He was already at this door when Alcott said, Ethan. He stopped. This man Boone, there's something you should know. This isn't the first claim he's filed. I've seen his name on documents from 3 other counties. Always the same pattern. Abandoned children, disabled children, children nobody's looking for. He let that sit for a moment. Nobody ever came back for those children. Ethan kept his hand on the doorframe. His knuckles were white. I'm coming back, he said quietly. Write that down somewhere. Clara knew something was wrong the second Ethan walked back into Doc Harper's office. She didn't ask. She watched him the way she watched everything, completely quietly filing away every detail, and she waited until Doc Harper had stepped out to his back room before she said, How bad is it? Ethan pulled the other chair around and sat facing her. Samuel was asleep against her chest, his small fist curled under his chin. There's a man named Silas Boone, Ethan said. Clara went very still. You know that name, Ethan said. Vernon mentioned him once. Her voice had flattened. Back in Abilene, said he'd met a businessman who was always looking for workers, for his operations out west. She swallowed. I didn't understand it then. I was listening from the other side of the door. Your stepfather signed papers, Ethan said. Legal papers, transferring guardianship of you and Samuel to Boone. The color drained from Clara's face so completely it frightened him. But she didn't make a sound. She pulled Samuel closer and pressed her lips together and looked at a point somewhere past Ethan's shoulder. He sold us, she said. Yes. For money. Yes. She was quiet. Samuel stirred in his sleep, and she automatically adjusted her hold on him, her hand spreading flat across his back, and Ethan watched her do it. This child steadying her baby brother while the ground fell out from under her, and felt something cold and certain settle into his chest. What happens now? She asked. Now I fight it. Can you? I'm going to. Her eyes came to his. Mr. Walker, I need you to tell me the truth. Not what you think I want to hear. The real truth. He held her gaze. Boone has papers. Papers the law recognizes. I have a judge working to challenge them. But it takes time, and Boone knows where you are now. He paused. He'll come. When? Soon. Maybe today. Clara looked down at Samuel. Her jaw was tight. He can't have Samuel, she said. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was the flattest, most absolute thing Ethan had ever heard come out of a human being. I don't care what the papers say. He cannot have Samuel. He won't, Ethan said. You don't know that. No, Ethan said. But I know that I'm standing between you and anyone who tries, and that's going to have to be enough for right now. Clara looked at him for a long moment. The kind of look that measures a person down to the bone. Then she nodded once, short and sharp, like she'd made a decision she was going to stand behind. All right, she said. Then we go back to the ranch. That's right. And we don't run. No, Ethan said. We don't run. Silas Boone found them before they made it out of town. He was standing in the middle of the main street when Ethan came out of the livery with Dust saddled Clara already up in the saddle with Samuel. Boone was a wide man, not tall, with the particular kind of confidence that comes from having been right about money too many times. He had 2 men with him hired by the look of them, the kind of men who stood a certain way when they were being paid to stand beside someone. He looked at Clara first, then at Samuel, then at Ethan. Mr. Walker, he said, like they knew each other, like this was a conversation that had been scheduled. I don't know you, Ethan said. No. But you've been to see Judge Alcott, so you know who I am. Boone smiled. It didn't reach anything. I'm not here to make trouble. I just want what's legally mine. Those children aren't yours. The papers say different. Papers signed by a man who left a crippled 9-year-old and a sick newborn on a public road to die, Ethan said. His voice stayed even. I'd be careful about what you claim those papers mean. Boone tilted his head. I purchased a legitimate guardianship. You purchased children, Ethan said. There's a word for that. Something moved through Boone's expression, not anger exactly, but a tightening, a recalibration. He looked at Clara again. Young lady, I want you to understand that what I'm offering is opportunity, employment, a way to contribute. She's 9 years old, Ethan said. Many children work at 9. Not mine. The word landed in the street between them and sat there. Boone looked at Ethan. The 2 men behind Boone shifted their weight. Dust made a sound low in his throat and stamped once. Clara's voice came from above, quiet and clear. I know what those camps are, she said. Everyone looked at her. She was looking at Boone with those dark, still eyes Samuel held against her chest, sitting straight in the saddle, like she'd been born there. I heard things, in Abilene, about the children who went to work for you, about how many came back. She paused. None of them came back. Boone's smile flickered. Smart girl, he said. And somehow he made it sound like a threat. Ride on, Ethan said. This isn't over, Walker. No, Ethan agreed. It ain't. Boone held his gaze for another moment. Then he stepped back and gestured to his men, and the 3 of them walked off down the street, and Ethan watched them go all the way until they turned the corner and disappeared. He didn't move until they were gone. Then he put his boot in the stirrup and swung up behind Clara and took the reins, and they rode out of Red Hollow in silence, the cold wind off the flat land pressing against them, Samuel asleep between them and Red Hollow falling away at their backs. After a mile, Clara said, He's going to come to the ranch. Yes. With the sheriff. Probably. She was quiet for a moment. Are you scared? Ethan thought about it. Not of him, he said. Of losing. Those are different things. What's the difference? Scared of a man means he already beat you in your head. Scared of losing means you still got something worth fighting for. Clara turned that over. Samuel made a small sound, and she shifted him without thinking. Which one are you? Second one, Ethan said. She nodded slowly. Then she said, Me too. And it was so quiet the wind almost took it. But Ethan heard it. And he kept riding. Back at the ranch, he did 2 things before he even took off his coat. He wrote a letter to the Federal Circuit office in Austin, detailing everything Alcott had told him about Boone's pattern, the counties, the children, the documents, and he wrote it out to the Post himself. And then he came back and stood in the middle of his kitchen, and looked at Clara sitting by the fire with Samuel in her lap and said, "I'm going to need help." Clara looked up. "From who?" "People who know this county. People Boone doesn't own." He pulled out a chair and sat down. "Doc Harper, Mrs. Eleanor Reed. She's the school teacher, been here 15 years, knows every family in the territory. And Jonah Briggs, rancher. Lost a daughter a few years back, and there's reasons he's got no tolerance for men who use children." "You trust these people?" "With my life." Clara looked at him carefully. "With our lives?" "Yes," Ethan said without hesitation. "With yours." She was quiet. The fire crackled. Samuel's breathing was deep and even, the sound of a baby who had found for the first time a temperature and a heartbeat and a pair of arms he recognized as safe. "Okay," Clara said. "Then we bring them in." "Tomorrow," Ethan said. "Tonight you sleep." She opened her mouth. He looked at her. She closed it. "Yes, sir," she said. But before she lay down, she did one more thing. She reached into the pocket of her dress and brought out a small object, folded paper worn at the creases like it had been handled many times, and set it on the table between them. Ethan looked at it. "What is that?" "The paper Vernon made me carry," she said. "Said I had to keep it on me always. Said it was the proof of who I belonged to." Her voice was steady, perfectly steady. "I don't know what it says. I can read numbers, but not all the words." Ethan unfolded it. He read it once. Then he read it again. It was a bill of transfer, dated 3 weeks ago, signed by Vernon Bennett and countersigned by Silas Boone. Clara May Bennett and Samuel James Bennett transferred into the guardianship of Silas Boone in exchange for $40 and the forgiveness of an outstanding debt. $40. And a debt. He folded it back up and set it on the table and looked at Clara. "You've been carrying that since he handed it to you," he said. "Since the morning we left Abilene." "Why?" She met his eyes. "Because I thought if I ever found somebody who might help us, I'd need proof that somebody was trying to hurt us." She paused. "I was right." Ethan Walker looked at this 9-year-old girl who had carried her own sale price in her pocket across 200 miles of Texas with a dying baby in her arms, and not once let herself give up. And he felt something close in his chest that he hadn't felt since the morning he'd stood over Sarah's grave and understood that grief had a bottom, and you could reach it. This was the other side of that. He picked up the paper and tucked it inside his coat. "Get some sleep, Clara," he said. "What are you going to do with it?" "Show it to the right people," he said. "And make sure every single wrong person in this county understands exactly what they put their name to." The fire started at 2 in the morning. Ethan was already awake. He'd been sleeping light since the encounter with Boone in town. The kind of half-sleep where every sound registers twice, and he smelled the smoke before he saw the light through the window. He was out the door with his rifle before he'd finished pulling on his boots. The barn was burning fast. Too fast. The kind of fast that doesn't happen by accident. He got the horses out, got the feed stored away from the walls, beat back what he could with wet burlap until the fire decided it had made its point and burned itself down to the frame. By the time the last of it died, the eastern sky was going gray, and his hands were blistered, and the barn was a ruin, and he was standing in the yard looking at it when he heard the cabin door open behind him. Clara came across the yard on her crutch, the pine support he'd roughed together 2 days ago. Not the proper one. He was still building, moving fast. Samuel bundled against her chest. "I smelled it," she said. "Is Dust?" "He's fine. All the horses are fine." She looked at the barn. Her face went through several things very quickly and settled on controlled and deliberate. "Boone," she said. "Yes." "He's sending a message." "He's sent it," Ethan said. He turned toward the front of the cabin. "Stay here." The note was nailed to the door with a 6-inch spike. He read it once, pulled it free, and carried it inside. Clara read it over his arm. "Return the children, or lose everything." 7 words. No signature. None needed. She set Samuel down in his crate and stood with both hands on the table and breathed carefully in and out. And then she said, "Ethan." It was the first time she'd used his name without the mister. He wasn't sure she noticed. "I'll go," she said. "No. Listen to me. No, Clara. If I go, he stops comin' after you." She turned to face him, and her eyes were dry, and her voice was steady, and every word was deliberate. "Your barn is gone. Your cattle, he'll take your cattle next. Your land. Everything you have left. And it's because of us. It's because of me and Samuel. And I am not." Her voice broke for exactly 1 second. Then it came back harder. "I am not going to be the reason you lose everything again." Ethan set the note on the table. He looked at her. "You think going with Boone saves us?" he said. "You think those camps let people go?" "You heard what Alcott said. Nobody came back, Clara. Not one child." She flinched. He kept going. "You walk out that door, and you and Samuel disappear into New Mexico, and I never know what happened to you. That's not a trade. That's just a slower way for all three of us to lose." He pulled the chair out and sat down to her level. "I made you a promise on that trail. You remember what I said?" She looked at the floor. "Clara, look at me." She looked up. Her jaw was tight and her eyes were wet, and she was fighting both. "I said nobody's leaving you again," he told her. "That means I'm not leaving you. And you're not leaving here, not because of Boone, not because of any piece of paper he filed in any office in this territory." He paused. "You understand me?" A long silence. Samuel made a small sound in his crate. The wind moved through the charred remains of the barn outside with a sound like breathing. "I'm scared," Clara said, quietly, like it cost her something to say it. "I know. I've been scared before and I handled it. But this is—" She stopped. "He's not scared of anything, Ethan. Men like that, they don't stop. They don't quit. They just wait until you're tired, and then they take what they want." "Then we don't get tired," Ethan said. "And we don't wait for him to move first." He stood. "I'm riding out this morning. Harper Reed Briggs. Today. Before Boone makes his next move. What if he comes while you're gone? You bolt the door and you don't open it for anyone except me. And if he breaks it down?" Ethan crossed to the cabinet by the door and took out the second revolver, the smaller one. The one he'd kept oiled but hadn't fired in a year, and set it on the table between them. Clara stared at it. "You know how to use one?" he asked. "No. I'll show you before I go." He checked the cylinder. "You won't need it, but you'll have it." She put her hand on it. Slowly. Like she was making a decision in stages. Then she picked it up and held it the way a person holds something they've accepted, even if they didn't choose it. "Come back fast," she said. "Yes, ma'am," Ethan said. Bonk. Doc Harper didn't wait for Ethan to finish talking. He went to his coat on the third sentence and had it on by the fifth. Mrs. Eleanor Reed, the schoolteacher, listened from behind her desk, with her hands folded and her expression going progressively harder, until her face looked like it had been set in iron. When Ethan got to the part about the bill of transfer $40 and a debt, she stood up so fast her chair scraped the floor. "He sold them," she said. Not a question. Signed and dated. And Boone filed in Alcott's office. 8 days ago, before he even knew where the children were. Reed looked at Harper. "He knew Bennett was going to leave them," she said. "He planned it. The abandonment was part of the arrangement." The room got very quiet. Ethan hadn't let himself think it through that far. But hearing it said out loud in Reed's precise, certain voice, it landed with the weight of something that had been true all along and was only now being named. Boone hadn't just purchased children. He'd arranged for them to be made available. He'd paid Vernon Bennett not just for the guardianship, but for the act of leaving them somewhere they could be retrieved. "How many times has he done this?" Harper said. He was very still. The kind of still that in a younger man would have been the moment before violence. "Alcott said 3 other counties," Ethan said. "Same pattern each time. And the children. Gone." Reed put both hands flat on her desk. "I want to see that paper," she said. Ethan put it in front of her. She read it twice. Then she looked up. I know a man in the federal circuit, Judge Calloway out of Austin. He's been building a case against labor indenture abuses for 2 years. If I wire him today with this document as evidence— How long does a wire take? Ethan said. A day to reach him, maybe 2 for him to move. I may not have 2 days. Then you hold until he gets here, she said, and we make sure the town knows what is happening in the meantime. She held the paper up. This isn't just about your children, Ethan. This is about what Boone has been doing across this entire territory. Every person in Red Hollow has a right to know. If I push this into the open, Boone moves faster, Ethan said. He'll use the sheriff. Let him, Reed said. I've been in this town 20 years. I know where the sheriff's debts are, and so does half the congregation at the First Baptist Church. Her expression didn't soften, but something in it sharpened into something close to satisfaction. You bring the fight into the open, Ethan. I'll handle the town. Seg. Jonah Briggs said 2 words when Ethan finished. I'm in. Then he saddled his horse. He was a large, quiet man, Briggs not a talker, not a debater, the kind of man who communicated most clearly through what he was willing to put his body between. He'd lost a daughter 6 years ago, not to Boone, but to a similar kind of indifferent system, and the experience had left him with the permanent expression of a man who had permanently settled his accounts with hesitation. They rode back toward the ranch together, and it was Briggs who said halfway along the road, He's going to move tonight. Probably, Ethan said. He'll bring the sheriff. Legal cover. Yes. You ready for that? Ethan didn't answer right away. He thought about the barn, about the note with its spike still sitting on his kitchen table, about Clara at 9 years old, with her hand wrapped around a revolver she didn't know how to fire, bolting herself inside his cabin with her baby brother while men circled outside. I have been ready for this since the day on that trail, he said. I just didn't know it yet. Briggs nodded. Then let's go home. They came at dusk. The sheriff and 4 deputies rode into the yard with Boone a half step behind them, not leading, never leading. That was the thing about men like Boone. They always put the law in front of them like a shield, and Ethan was already standing in the yard when they arrived. No rifle, just his revolver on his hip, and his hat and his coat standing still as a fence post. Boone stayed on his horse. The sheriff climbed down. Sheriff Dale Putnam was 45 years old and had been sheriff of Red Hollow County for 11 of those years and had the look of a man who had made a great many small compromises over a great many years and was still telling himself it had all been necessary. Ethan, he said. Dale, you know why I'm here. I know why Boone told you you're here, Ethan said. I'm curious whether you know the difference. Putnam's jaw tightened. He held up a document. I got a court order, Ethan. Those children are to be remanded to Silas Boone. That court order was filed on falsified documents, Ethan said. The guardianship was obtained through a paid arrangement with a man who then deliberately abandoned 2 children on a public road. A 9-year-old girl with a disabling injury and an infant under 3 months old. He kept his voice even. You want to serve that order, Dale, you put your name to all of that. Putnam hesitated, just for a moment, but Ethan saw it. Boone moved his horse forward. Sheriff, serve the order. My name is already on it. Putnam said more to himself than anyone. There are witnesses, Ethan said. Judge Alcott, Doc Harper, Mrs. Reed, Jonah Briggs, and a federal circuit judge in Austin who received a wire this afternoon with a copy of the original transfer document. He watched Boone's face. $40, Silas. That's what you paid for them. You want me to say that number out loud in this yard? Something moved behind Boone's eyes, rapid and cold. A man recalculating. Serve the order, he said again. Putnam took a step forward. The deputies moved with him. Ethan didn't move. He stood in the dirt in front of his own front door and looked at all 5 of them and said quiet, as a man giving direction on a Sunday afternoon. You'll have to kill me first. Nobody spoke. Then the cabin door opened. Clara came out onto the porch step. She had Samuel in her arms, not hidden, not protected behind her body, but held out slightly visible, presented. She had gotten herself from the floor to standing, using only the doorframe and her will. And she stood there, with her ruined leg and her baby brother and her 9-year-old face, that had never once in Ethan's knowing of her shown anything that could be called surrender. She looked at the sheriff. "My name is Clara May Bennett," she said. Her voice carried across the yard like it was the most natural thing in the world to have a voice that carried. "I'm 9 years old. My stepfather, Vernon Bennett, took money from this man," she looked at Boone, "to leave me and my baby brother on the road to die. I have been bought and sold and left in the dirt, and I'm telling you right now that I know what those camps are. I know what happens to children who go there, and I want to know—" She looked at Putnam. "If you are going to stand in my yard with papers that say I am this man's property, I want to know if you are going to look me in the face while you do it." The yard was absolutely silent. One of the deputies lowered his rifle. Then the gate at the edge of the property opened and Doc Harper walked through it. And behind him Mrs. Reed and Jonah Briggs. And behind them, slowly in ones and twos, the way people move when they're not quite sure they're brave enough, but they're going to be anyway, came others. The widow Pratt with her goats. The blacksmith's son. 2 families from the northern properties. The young couple who ran the dry goods store and had heard the whole story from Reed that afternoon. 8 people, then 12, then closer to 20. Putnam turned and looked at them. He turned back and looked at Clara on the porch. He turned and looked at Boone. Boone's face had gone very still. The face of a man watching his plan develop a crack. "Dale," Ethan said quietly, "think very carefully about what you do next. Because there are 20 witnesses in this yard, a federal inquiry already in motion, and a 9-year-old girl standing on that porch who is going to remember every face she sees tonight for the rest of her life." Putnam looked at the paper in his hand. He looked at Clara. He looked at Boone. Then he folded the court order and put it in his coat. "I'm not serving this tonight," he said. Boone went rigid. "Putnam, I said I'm not serving it." His voice had changed. Not noble, not transformed, not suddenly righteous, just tired. The voice of a man who had reached the bottom of how much he was willing to do. "Get your lawyers and bring me something cleaner. I'm done for tonight." Boone stared at him. Then he looked at Ethan. The calculation behind his eyes was working hard and fast, and what came out of it was something flat and cold. "This isn't over," he said. "You said that last time," Ethan told him. Boone turned his horse and rode out. His men followed. The deputies went with the Sheriff Putnam, not looking back, and the sound of hooves faded out into the dark beyond the gate. The yard was quiet. Then Jonah Briggs said from the back of the crowd, "Somebody want to tell me where the coffee is?" And the tension broke, the way tension does when it's been held too long. Not all at once, but in pieces. A sound here, an exhale there, someone almost laughing, and someone else almost crying. And Doc Harper was the first one to the porch, and he looked up at Clara and said, "You all right, young lady?" Clara looked down at Samuel, who had slept through the entire confrontation with the magnificent indifference of the very young. "He's fine," she said. "We're fine." She looked at Ethan. He was still standing in the middle of the yard where he'd been all along. He hadn't moved an inch. He looked at her across the distance between them, across the people, and the dark and the cold, and everything that had just happened, and everything that was still coming. And she looked back at him, with those dark, old, steady eyes. And she said just loud enough for him to hear, "I told you we weren't going to run." Nobody slept much that night. Ethan sat in the chair by the door with his rifle across his knees until the sky turned gray, and Clara lay in the bed with Samuel pressed to her chest and her eyes open more than they were closed. The people who'd come to the yard had gone home near midnight. Briggs last, stopping at the gate to say he'd be back at first light, and the ranch had settled into a silence that felt less like peace and more like the held breath before something breaks. At dawn, Alcott's boy rode in hard with a folded note. Ethan read it on the porch. He read it twice, Then he went inside, and Clara was already sitting up reading his face. "Tell me," she said. "Boone filed a second emergency order overnight," Ethan said. "With a circuit judge in Midland, someone he knows, someone he pays." He sat down across from her. "The order requires immediate remand. It supersedes Alcott's authority." Clara didn't blink. "When?" "The rider carrying the signed order left Midland at midnight. Alcott's boy says he'll be here by noon." Noon. 4 hours. "And the federal wire?" Clara asked. "Reed sent it yesterday, but federal marshals out of Austin are 2 days' ride at minimum." He set the note on the table. "We have a 4-hour window and no legal cover to stand behind." "Then we make our own cover," Clara said. He looked at her. "Get Mrs. Reed," she said. "Get every person who was in this yard last night. Get them back here before that rider arrives. If Boone wants to take us in front of witnesses, let him try." She shifted Samuel to her other arm. "A corrupt order from a paid judge looks a lot worse when 20 people are watching." Ethan was already reaching for his coat. "You're 9 years old?" he said. "I'm aware," Clara said flatly. "Go." He went. Mags. The rider from Midland arrived at 11:47. Ethan knew because Clara had been checking the clock on the mantel every 10 minutes since 10 and reporting the time in a voice that gave nothing away. The yard was full again. Reed had ridden herself to bring people this time, not waiting for word to travel. Briggs had come with 3 of his ranch hands. The widow Pratt stood near the fence with her arms crossed, and the expression of a woman who had survived a great deal and was prepared to survive more. Doc Harper was there. The young pastor from the First Baptist Church. The blacksmith. His wife. 31 people by Ethan's count when the rider came through the gate. The rider was young, mid-20s, nervous eyes, moving with the stiff discomfort of someone who had expected a simple delivery and was now looking at 31 faces and trying to decide what that meant. He found Ethan, held out the document. Ethan took it, read it, handed it to Reed without a word. Reed read it. Then she looked at the rider. "Who signed this order?" "Judge Cormac Whelan, ma'am, out of Midland." "Cormac Whelan," Reed said, "has been under investigation by the 8th Federal Circuit for judicial misconduct since March of this year." She held the document out toward him. "If you ride back to wherever Silas Boone is waiting and tell him that this order was served in front of 31 witnesses who can testify to its origin, I imagine he'll have other things to worry about than these children." The rider looked at Ethan. Ethan said nothing, just looked back. The rider took the document. He rode out without dismounting. The yard exhaled. Then the gate opened again, and Sheriff Dale Putnam walked in on foot. No deputies, no horse, just himself and his hat in his hands, and the crowd parted to let him through. He stopped in front of Ethan and stood there with the particular posture of a man who has spent a night getting straight with himself and isn't done yet. "I sent my own wire to Austin last night," Putnam said. "After I left here." Ethan waited. 11 years I've been sheriff in this county. I've done things I shouldn't have done. Looked away from things I shouldn't have looked away from." He glanced at Clara on the porch, then back at Ethan. "But I have a daughter. She's 7. And I lay awake last night thinking about that bill of transfer you mentioned. $40. His jaw worked. "I want you to know that I am going to do what I can to make this right." "What did you put in the wire?" Ethan said. "Everything I know about Boone's operation in this county. Names, dates, amounts." Putnam looked older than he had yesterday. "And a request for immediate federal jurisdiction." Clara's voice came from the porch. "Where is Boone right now?" Putnam looked at her. "He was at the hotel last night. This morning he's—" He stopped. Something crossed his face. "He was at the hotel." Ethan was already moving. "Harper, stay with Clara." "Ethan—" Clara started. "Stay here." He was through the gate. Boone was not at the hotel. The hotel clerk said he'd checked out at 6 in the morning, paid his bill in cash, and left with his 2 men and a wagon. Direction west. Ethan stood at the hotel desk and thought fast. West meant the Clearwater Creek Road. The Clearwater Creek Road passed within a mile of the Bennett Ranch, which meant Boone wasn't running. He was making one last move. Ethan rode hard. He took the shortcut through the Briggs property, cutting a full mile off the road, pushing dust harder than he liked to push a horse, and when he came over the ridge above the ranch, he pulled up short and looked down and understood immediately what he was seeing. Boone's wagon was in the yard. Not the front yard, the back near the kitchen door. The two hired men were down from the wagon, and the kitchen door was open. He rode down fast and came off dust while the horse was still moving and went through the front of the cabin in 3 steps, and he stopped in the middle of the kitchen and took in the scene. Clara was standing with her back against the far wall. Samuel was in the crate. One of Boone's men was 2 feet from her, with his hand out, saying something low and fast. The second man was by the door. Clara had the revolver. She had it up, both hands aimed at the man in front of her. Her arms were shaking, but her grip was solid, and her eyes were absolutely level. "Don't touch him," she was saying. "I told you, don't touch my brother." The man had his hand still out. "Little girl, put that down before you hurt." "My name," Clara said, "is not little girl." "Clara," Ethan said. The man by the door spun. Ethan put him down with 1 strike. No gun, just his elbow and the wall and the man's inability to brace in time. And he was across the room before Boone's first man could make a decision. And the decision got made for him when Ethan's hand closed around his collar and walked him backward out the kitchen door. He left both men in the yard. Boone was still on the wagon seat. He looked at Ethan and then at the 2 men in the dirt and recalculated something behind his eyes. "It's over," Ethan said. "The Federal Circuit hasn't ruled. I'm not talking about the circuit." Ethan walked toward the wagon. "I'm talking about this county, this town. 31 people who watched you try to serve a fraudulent order this morning and will testify to it. A sheriff who spent last night writing down everything he knows about your business dealings. And a federal wire with a document signed by Vernon Bennett and countersigned by you that shows exactly what you paid for and exactly what you arranged." He stopped at the wagon wheel. "It's done, Silas. You're done." Something in Boone's face went through several things rapidly and landed on something Ethan hadn't expected to see. Not rage, not cold calculation, but a flicker of something almost like exhaustion. The exhaustion of a man who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time and just felt it slip. "Those children would have been fed," Boone said, quietly, like he still needed to believe it. "They would have had shelter, work, a purpose, better than a roadside." "Better than a roadside," Ethan repeated. "Yes, you measure every child's life against a ditch and call yourself their benefactor." He looked up at Boone on the wagon seat. "Get out of this county, because the next time you come near this ranch, I won't be standing here talking to you." Boone sat for a moment. Then he picked up his reins. He drove out through the gate and didn't look back. Ethan stood in the yard until the sound of the wagon faded. Then he went inside. Clara was sitting at the table. Samuel was in her arms. The revolver was back on the table. Her hands were still trembling, but barely the faintest vibration, the last of the adrenaline working its way out. She looked up at Ethan. "I wasn't going to shoot him," she said. "I just needed him to think I would." "Did he think it?" "Yes," she said. And something moved across her face that wasn't quite a smile, but was something close to one fierce and complicated and entirely hers. Ethan sat across from her. "You all right?" "My hands won't stop." "That happens. It'll pass." "I know." She looked down at Samuel, who was looking back up at her with the focused, serious expression that very young babies have when they're studying a face they trust completely. "He slept through it. He doesn't know." "No," Ethan said. "He doesn't." "Good." She pulled him closer. "He shouldn't have to know yet." Was. The federal marshals rode in the next afternoon, 4 of them, with a warrant signed by Judge Calloway in Austin, and a file 2 inches thick that Mrs. Reed had not mentioned to Ethan was already in existence before her wire arrived. Calloway had been building a case against Boone for 14 months. Reed's wire and the bill of transfer had given him what he needed to act. They arrested Silas Boone, 12 miles west of Red Hollow, where he'd stopped at a roadside camp that Ethan suspected he'd used before. They arrested 2 of Boone's hired men, and they arrested Judge Cormac Whelan by wire through the Midland Sheriff's Office before noon the following day. Sheriff Putnam was not arrested. He cooperated fully, provided everything he'd promised, and when the marshals left, he went back to his office and sat down and wrote a letter of resignation that he held on to for 3 days before deciding he wasn't done making things right yet. He'd finish his term. Do it clean this time. It wasn't enough, and he knew it, and he kept going anyway. Ethan lost the barn. He lost 11 head of cattle that had wandered during the fire chaos and couldn't be recovered. He lost the better part of his winter stores and 2 months of income he didn't have yet and couldn't get back without work he didn't have time for right now. He did not lose the ranch. Doc Harper's colleague in San Antonio, the physician who'd studied in Boston, wrote back inside a week. He'd seen cases like Clara's before. Bracing could help, possibly significantly. He could consult by correspondence for now, and there was talk of him making a circuit through West Texas in the spring. Clara read the letter 3 times. She didn't say much, but that night after Samuel was asleep, she sat by the fire and worked on the arithmetic exercises Reed had started sending home with her. She'd been riding into Red Hollow for school 3 days a week now on the modified saddle Ethan had built, and she worked with a concentration that was almost aggressive, like she was settling a debt with the future. "You don't have to do that tonight," Ethan said from across the room. "I know." She kept working. "Mrs. Reed says I'm 2 years ahead of the other children my age." "Mrs. Reed is right. She says I could teach someday, if I wanted." She looked up briefly. "She says a lot of things." "Eleanor Reed has a gift for seeing what a person can become," Ethan said. Clara looked at her paper. "She sees it in you too," she said, carefully, like she was placing something fragile on a shelf. "She told me. She said you were the best man in this county and you'd been wasting it grieving." The room was quiet. "She said that," Ethan said, word for word. Clara glanced up again. "She's not wrong, is she?" He didn't answer. Clara set her pencil down. "Ethan, can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." She looked at the fire. Samuel's breathing was deep and even from the crate in the corner, the sound of something that had been in danger of stopping and hadn't, and was now making up for lost time. "When your wife and James were alive, what was this place like?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Loud," he said finally. James was loud. He had opinions about everything, even things he didn't understand yet. Sarah used to say he'd either be a lawyer or a preacher because he couldn't leave any idea alone without arguing with it. He paused. She used to sing in the evenings, after supper. Nothing formal, just whatever came to her. "What did you do?" "Listened," Ethan said. "Mostly. I was never much for talking." Clara considered that. "You talk more now," she said. He looked at her. "Then I think you used to," she said. "I think you got quieter after you lost them, and then you got used to being quiet, and then being quiet started to feel like the only thing you knew how to do." She picked up her pencil again. "But it's not." He sat with that for a minute. "When did you get so sure of people?" he said. "I've had to read them fast my whole life," she said simply. "You learn people fast when getting them wrong costs you." The fire crackled. Outside, the wind moved through what was left of the cottonwoods. Samuel sighed in his sleep, a long, settled sound. Ethan looked across the room at this girl. This sharp, relentless, careful girl who carried a revolver and did arithmetic, and read people faster than most adults managed in a lifetime, and felt the thing that had been building in his chest since the trail, since the first morning, since the standoff, since every moment in between. It didn't have a clean name. It was something in the territory between gratitude and belonging, and the particular grief that comes from understanding how close you came to missing something. He almost said it then, almost found the words. But Clara was already back to her arithmetic pencil, moving brow slightly furrowed, working out a problem with the same steady focus she brought to everything that mattered. And Ethan understood that some things didn't need to be said yet, that they were already true, and that truth had its own timeline. He picked up his mending and sat by the fire and listened to the sound of his house being something other than empty. And winter settled in around them hard and white and close, and none of them not once felt cold. Winter broke slow that year, the way it does in West Texas. Not all at once, but in degrees, the cold pulling back a little more each morning, the ground softening at the edges before it softened in the middle. By the time the first real warmth came in March, Samuel had grown so much that his face had changed from the pinched, urgent face of a baby fighting to survive into something rounder and more deliberate a face that was learning to be curious about the world rather than afraid of it. He had started laughing. Not just sounds, actual laughing, belly deep and sudden, triggered by Ethan's voice, or Clara's hand, or the particular way the light moved across the ceiling in the afternoon. Clara would call Ethan in from whatever he was doing, just to hear it standing in the middle of the kitchen with her brother on her hip, and the look on her face of someone witnessing a small miracle for the 100th time and still not being tired of it. "Do it again," she'd say. Ethan would make the sound a low, ridiculous rumbling that he'd discovered purely by accident one evening when he was talking to Samuel about the cattle and ran out of things to say and made a noise instead, and Samuel would dissolve into laughter again, arms going wide, feet kicking. "He sounds like a goat," Ethan said one evening. "He sounds like someone who's never been hungry," Clara said, and the way she said it closed the subject gently and permanently. The doctor from San Antonio came in April. Dr. Eli Marsh, lean and precise, and younger than Ethan expected, who examined Clara's leg with the focused attention of someone who was genuinely interested in the problem, rather than performing interest. He asked Clara questions directly, without going through Ethan, and she answered them with the same directness, and by the end of the examination, the two of them had developed a mutual respect that looked from the outside like two professionals discussing a shared project. "The leg can be braced," Marsh said. "Significantly. Not corrected. I want to be honest about that. The bone structure is what it is. But with the right support, the right exercises, I believe you can walk without the crutch, or with a cane at most." He looked at Clara. "It will take work. It will hurt sometimes." "I know what hurt feels like," Clara said. "Yes?" Marsh said. "I imagine you do." He looked at Ethan. "I'll leave detailed instructions. I can come back in 6 weeks to assess the progress." After he left, Clara sat at the kitchen table with the written instructions in her hands and read them through twice without speaking. Ethan watched her. "You don't have to start today," he said. "I know." She set the papers down. "I'll start tomorrow." She looked up. "Will you help me with the exercises?" He said someone should be there in case. "Every morning," Ethan said. "Before anything else." She nodded. Then quietly, "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Just do the work." The corner of her mouth moved. "Yes, sir." It was a Tuesday in late April when the wagon came down the road and stopped at the gate. Ethan was in the yard when it happened, working on the fence line that Boone's men had damaged the night of the standoff and that he'd been meaning to fix for months. He saw the wagon stop, saw the figure climb down slowly, moving with the stiffness of someone who had been traveling a long time. He didn't recognize her at first, not because she'd changed dramatically, but because he'd built a version of her in his mind from Clara's spare, careful descriptions, and the woman standing at his gate was both exactly that and nothing like it. She was younger looking than he'd expected, tired in a way that went past the body and into the bones. She was looking at the cabin, and Ethan walked to the gate. She saw him coming and stood still, both hands in front of her waiting. She had the look of someone who has rehearsed something many times and isn't sure any of it will hold up. "Mr. Walker," she said. He stopped at the gate, said nothing. "My name is Margaret Bennett," she said. "I'm Clara's mother." The gate was between them. He kept it there. "How'd you find us?" he said. Red Hollow isn't a secret. She swallowed. I left the wagon train in New Mexico 4 weeks ago. I've been traveling back since. She looked at the cabin again. I heard what happened with Boone. In Midland, people were talking about it, about a rancher and a little girl who stood their ground. Her voice wavered and came back. I knew it was them. Why'd you come? She's my daughter. She was your daughter when your husband put her off the wagon, Ethan said. His voice stayed even. It cost him something to keep it that way. Margaret flinched. I know what I did, she said. Or what I didn't do. I know. She looked at him directly. I'm not here to take her from you. I don't have that right, and I know I don't. She stopped. I need to see her. I need her to know that I looked for her, that I came back. Ethan stood at the gate for a long moment. He thought about Clara's voice in the dark on the first night. She cried real hard, but she didn't get out with us. He thought about what it had cost a 9-year-old girl to say that without bitterness. To just say it plain like weather. Wait here, he said. He went inside. Clara was at the table doing her schoolwork. Samuel in the crate beside her. One hand resting on the crate's edge, the way it always was, that unconscious connection, always knowing where he was. She looked up when Ethan came in and read his face immediately. What happened? She said. Someone at the gate, he said. I need to tell you who it is before you decide anything. She put her pencil down very slowly. Who? Your mother. The room went absolutely still. Samuel made a small sound. Clara's hand tightened on the edge of his crate. She came here, Clara said. Yes. She came back. Not a question. Not quite an accusation. Something being processed in real time. She has. And you don't have to see her. I'll send her away right now if that's what you want. You say the word and she's gone. Clara looked at the table. Her jaw worked. She looked at Samuel. Then she looked at the door. Is she? She stopped, started again. Does she look all right? She looks tired, Ethan said. She looks like someone who's been traveling a long time. Clara pushed back her chair. She picked up her crutch, and she walked to the door, and Ethan stepped aside and let her go first. Margaret Bennett saw her daughter come out of the cabin and stopped breathing for a moment. Clara came across the yard without hurrying, moving with the particular efficiency that was entirely her own, and she stopped at the gate 6 feet away from her mother and looked at her, just looked, taking inventory the same way she took inventory of everything, complete, thorough, missing nothing. Margaret's hands came up in front of her. Clara! Don't! Clara said quietly. Margaret stopped. Just let me look at you first. Clara's voice was controlled but thin at the edges. Let me look. She looked. Margaret stood still and let herself be looked at. You're thinner, Clara said. Yes. Are you sick? No, just... Margaret pressed her lips together. No, I'm not sick. Clara shifted her weight on the crutch. Did he hurt you, Vernon? After we... No. A pause. He tried once. I left. Clara nodded slowly. Good. Clara. Margaret's voice broke on the word. I'm so sorry. What I let happen, I have thought about it every day since the moment that wagon started moving again. I have not stopped thinking about... I know, Clara said. I should have gotten off that wagon. I know. Clara's voice was still level, still careful, but something was working in it underneath. I know you should have, and you didn't. And for a long time I thought about that. I thought about it a lot. She looked at her mother steadily. But I also know you were scared. I know what scared does to people. I've been scared, and I wasn't always brave either. She paused. But I got braver. You were always brave, Margaret said. You were always braver than me. I had to be. Clara said simply. That landed between them and sat. Margaret looked past Clara at the cabin. Samuel, she said softly. Is he all right? He's perfect, Clara said. He's learning to laugh. Something moved across her face. He looks like Daddy. Margaret closed her eyes for 1 second. When she opened them, they were wet. Can I see him? Clara turned and looked at Ethan, who had been standing back near the porch. He met her gaze and gave nothing, no direction, no suggestion. Her choice completely. He'd meant that from the beginning. She turned back to her mother. You can see him, she said. And then we need to talk, you and me, about what happens next. They talked for 2 hours. Ethan stayed inside with Samuel, feeding him the mashed sweet potato that had become a recent obsession, and he listened to the voices in the yard. Not the words, just the sound of them, the rhythm, and he could track the conversation by the rhythm. The long silences, where something was being accepted. The shorter ones, where something was being refused. The one moment where Clara's voice rose briefly and then came back down under her own control. When it was done, Clara came inside alone. She didn't say anything for a minute. She sat down at the table and put her hands flat on the surface and looked at them. She's going to stay in Red Hollow, she said finally. She asked me if she could, whether I wanted her near. She looked up. I told her she could stay. But she's not. Things can't go back. I told her things can't go back to what they were, because there's nothing to go back to. She paused. She understood. And Samuel, Ethan said. He'll know her. He should know her. She's his mother. Clara's voice was careful and considered. But this is his home. And you're... She stopped. The room held its breath. You're what he knows, she said. Quietly. You're what I know. Ethan set Samuel in his crate and sat down across from Clara. She was looking at the table. Her hands were still flat on the surface, fingers spread the way she braced herself when something required steadiness. Ethan, she said. Clara. I've been thinking about something for a while. She still didn't look up. And I almost said it a dozen times, and then I didn't because I didn't know if it was the right thing to ask. He waited. If I called you Pa, she said it at the surface of the table, just above a whisper. If I called you that, would that be all right with you? The question settled into the room, like something that had been looking for that exact place to land. Ethan felt it go through him. Not painfully, not the way grief goes through you, but the way warmth does when you've been cold long enough that you've forgotten what warmth feels like, and then you feel it, and your whole body registers the absence of the cold all at once. He didn't answer right away. He couldn't. Clara finally looked up. Her eyes were dry. She'd made the decision to keep them dry, and she'd managed it, but only just. You don't have to. I want to tell you something, Ethan said. His voice came out rough at the edges. He steadied it. When I lost Sarah and James, I was absolutely certain that whatever I'd been meant to do with my life was done. That the part of me that knew how to love people had been buried with them and wasn't coming back. He held her gaze. I was wrong about that. Clara's hands tightened on the table. I stopped on that trail because dust stopped, he said. But I came down that embankment because of something else. Something I didn't have a name for then. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. I got one now. She looked at his hand over hers. Call me whatever you need to call me, he said. Whatever name fits what this is, because I already know what it is on my end. Clara pressed her lips together hard. 1 breath, 2. Then she said, Pa. Barely a sound, just the shape of it. And Ethan Walker, who had not cried since the morning he stood in the frozen ground beside 2 small graves and understood that the world did not stop for grief, felt something move through the back of his throat that had no name except human. He pulled her close and she let him, and Samuel laughed from his crate for no reason at all, the way babies do, as if he understood something the rest of them were only just catching up to. The spring that followed was the loudest season the Walker Ranch had known in years. Dr. Marsh came back in June as promised and declared Clara's progress remarkable, and then had a long technical conversation with Clara herself about the biomechanics of the brace that left Ethan completely lost, and both of them thoroughly satisfied. By July, she was walking with a cane instead of a crutch. By August, she was riding Dust alone for short stretches, the modified saddle doing exactly what Ethan had built it to do, and she had the expression during those rides of someone who had been told for 9 years what she could not do and had recently stopped listening. She started teaching 2 mornings a week, an informal thing children from the northern properties who couldn't make the ride into Red Hollow for school gathered in the Walker kitchen with borrowed slates, while Clara moved between them, with the patient, exacting manner of someone who understood both the material and the cost of not knowing it. Mrs. Reed sent word that she'd never seen a 9-year-old teach, but she'd also never seen a 9-year-old do most of what Clara did, and she was choosing to call it an educational innovation. Other families came. Not many. This wasn't a flood, it was a trickle, but they came. A widow with 3 children who'd lost everything to a bad winter. A father with a disabled son, traveling alone, who'd heard something about a ranch in Red Hollow County where people like his boy weren't turned away. Ethan housed what he could and pointed the rest toward help, and started building an addition to the cabin that he hadn't planned on building, but found he couldn't see a reason not to. Briggs helped with the framing. Harper brought medicine for the widow's youngest, who had a chest that rattled when the cold came. Reed wrote letters to every county and circuit she knew, naming Boone, naming Whelan, naming Vernon Bennett, making sure the record was complete and permanent. And Samuel learned to pull himself up on the side of his crate and stand briefly wobbling, delighted with himself, and fall and get up again. Clara watched him do it once, and then looked at Ethan and said, "He doesn't know yet that falling is supposed to be the end of it." "No," Ethan said. "Good," she said. "Let's not tell him." No. On a Sunday in October, the first real cold of the new season coming down from the north, and the cottonwoods turned the color of old gold. Ethan saddled 3 horses. Clara mounted Dust. Ethan took his own mare. Samuel rode in the carrier strapped across Ethan's chest, a contraption Mrs. Pratt had sewn from canvas and leather, and declared entirely sensible, and which Samuel treated with the enthusiasm of a small person who had recently discovered that the world is much larger on horseback. They rode out through the gate and onto the flat land, and Red Hollow fell away behind them, and there was nothing ahead except the open country going on forever in every direction, the way it does in Texas, like the land itself refuses to believe in limits. Clara rode beside Ethan. Her back was straight. Her hands were sure on the reins. She looked across at him. "Where are we going?" "Nowhere particular," he said. "Just out." She looked ahead. The wind came off the flat and moved her hair, and she turned her face into it the way she did that particular gesture. Eyes half closed, chin up, like she was tasting something she'd waited a long time to taste. "Pa," she said. He looked at her. "Thank you for stopping," she said. "On the trail. That evening." She kept her eyes forward. "I know you said Dust stopped, but you came down." He was quiet for a moment. The horses moved. Samuel made a sound against his chest, not a word, not yet, but pointed and deliberate, already his sister's brother, in the way he held nothing back. "Best thing I ever did," Ethan said. Clara nodded once. Firm and final. Then she touched her heels to Dust's sides, and the horse moved into an easy lope, and she rode ahead into that wide open country with her head up and her cane hanging from the saddle, and her whole body moving with the horse like she had always belonged there. And Ethan Walker watched her go, his daughter on his horse, his son against his heart, the ranch behind him, full of something that hadn't been there 3 years ago and would never leave again. Some people spend their whole lives on the same road and never stop for anything. And some people stop once for a voice thin as wire in the late afternoon for 2 children pressed against a broken tree at the edge of everything, and in that one stop find every single thing they never knew they were still looking for. The road doesn't care which kind of person you've been. It only cares about the moment you decide to be different. And on that October afternoon, with the cold coming and the light going gold, and his family riding ahead of him into the rest of their lives. Ethan Walker understood something he would carry until his last day. The people this world decides to throw away have a way of becoming, for the right person, the entire reason to keep going.